Why did you sit there, President? A lot of people have been mentioning competing partners. We're only going to have a brief conversation, a relatively brief conversation. But let me pick up that, because competing partners are new adversaries for many years, for so many years, with Mandela and the ANC. And we are speaking, we're speaking on Martin Luther King Day, by the way, in the United States. I'd like to ask you about what you went through as you reasoned with yourself, and you said in that clip that you weren't sure if you'd be kicked out by the Afrikaners for doing what you did, about the need for reconciliation, about the need for turning corners when you realize the political reality. And we're talking a few days after Ariel Sharon died. He was remembered for many things and hated but for many things. But on the other hand, shortly before he went into his coma, he'd made a transformation, which was to pull the Israelis out of Gaza. And he was seeing things in a very different way. And I wonder if you could just share with all these senior executives and the public servants and others the dilemma, but what can push someone like yourself, realizing the new reality, into understanding that there has to be a different way, even if it's so different from the policies and the politics that you and your party had been pursuing up to that point when you first met Mandela on the 13th of December, '89?
Well, firstly, I did not have a sudden revelation. It was a process through which I went and through which my fellow leaders in the National Party went. It started in the early 70s. It really started when a former Prime Minister of Great Britain made a speech which became known as the Winds of Change speech in the South African Parliament. And Harold Macmillan, at the beginning of the decolonization process of Africa, said the winds of change are sweeping over Africa. We all realized it. It changed the face of Africa. It changed the world thinking. We had the concerns that I referred to in my speech, which delayed reform in the case of South Africa. But at the end of the 70s, it was becoming clear to all of us who were in leading positions in the party that we had to change. That the concept of separate nation states, which we believed could bring justice and political freedom to all the people of South Africa, was failing. And that therefore we had to take a quantum leap. We had to do a 180-degree turn.
How long did that take you? Because we've got a message here from the governor himself. What was the most important moment that made you choose reconciliation and partnership, realizing the political price? Because for so many sitting here and well beyond, you have corporate responsibility, who have political responsibility, who have responsibility to their parties, to their electorate. They have to make a very difficult judgment. Even if it's the right thing, it may be a very expensive thing to do.
There were a few big moments. The first really big moment was when the internal partnership between the right wing and the center and the left wing of the National Party broke apart. Because of the moderate but nonetheless important reforms which my predecessor brought about, the right wing got restless. They were resisting this. They wanted to cling to apartheid. And this led to a split in the National Party in around about 1980, 1981. They established their own party called the Conservative Party. It has liberated those of us who remain behind to concentrate on the need for reform, on the necessity of reform, and of what direction, where do we want to go with this reform? And in that sense of the word, it was a crucial moment. I then became the leader of the National Party in the biggest province of South Africa, the Transvaal. It put me then in a position to be part of the top echelon of the National Party. It gave me the power and the opportunity.
What was your calculation, though? The risk was that you would be consigned to political oblivion.
No, I never feared that. I believe leadership requires a leader to develop a vision and to convince people to embrace that vision, to follow it, and to support him or her. And this is what we did within the National Party. It took us from 1981 to 1986 to produce, and I was part of a very powerful cabinet committee which worked on this, to produce a new vision. And that new vision was, we stand for one united South Africa, in which there will be no discrimination on the basis of race or color, in which all of us would have a vote of equal value, but in which there would be checks and balances which could prevent the domination of any one group over another group and which could prevent the abuse of power. That we put to a Congress of our party in '86 and said, give us a mandate to abandon the concept of separateness and to embrace the concept of togetherness. For me, that was a crucial moment. And from then on, when I became president in '89, I didn't have to define a vision. I've already embraced that new vision, and I saw it as my task to now develop action plans and to take initiatives which could ensure that that vision would become reality.
I'm morphing together several different questions here with a clear theme, brought together by Joanna Barsh, who's Director Emeritus of McKinsey, who was speaking yesterday about the new role of women, particularly in a country like Saudi Arabia. But building on competing partners and building on what you've just said, if you think of the country as a system, what is your advice on the levers to use in creating positive systemic change, transformation? Use South Africa, use Africa as an example, because you've changed so much, but there are now difficult challenges facing many African nations on the horizon. And I would like you to draw upon your leadership foundation about the leaders who cannot see the reality, particularly the empowerment coming from the mobile phone and connectivity, which is going to hit them quite hard at some point in the near future.
Well, just speaking as an African, we're way ahead on mobile phones in Africa. We skipped the whole era of landlines.
But what about the impact on political leaders?
And the impact on political leaders has been great. My philosophy, the philosophy which worked in South Africa, was inclusivity, was to bring people with widely diverging views and to sit around the table and through a process of give and take to reach agreement on workable compromises. And there was give and take. I don't know of any dispute, whether it's between husband and wife, whether it's between neighbors, or whether it is between different political parties within a country, which has been settled without negotiation and a process of give and take and defining workable compromises. Negotiations which end up with a victor and a vanquished is not a solution. It will come back to bite you. But negotiations where painful sacrifices are made by all the major parties, and this is what happened in South Africa, results in a new agreement which has the support of the majority of all the people.
Because there's a Twitter message here from Abdurrahman Al-Hakti. What's the one thing you regret doing in your life and why? Could it be a regret that the politics and the realities back in the 70s and 80s were not allowing the kind of reconciliation and movement together, which in the end you were able to engineer towards the end of the 80s and with what happened on the 11th of February 1990 with Mandela's release?
Yes, I think that is my greatest regret, that we could not have started sooner. But there were factors inhibiting it. I referred to one of them in my speech, namely the threat of expansionist Soviet communism. Soviet communism was supporting financially, with weapons, with arms, with ammunition, with everything they could, the liberation movements in Africa. But they had an own agenda, a hidden agenda. They wanted to directly or indirectly gather control over the whole of Southern Africa. There were tens of thousands of Cuban troops on our borders. What helped us tremendously, and we had no hand in it, was Gorbachev's initiatives. When the Berlin Wall came down, the threat of Soviet expansionist policies lost its sting. And suddenly, far beyond what was expected. Back on my side, I think
And therefore, finally, reconciliation.
there's something more important than understand. Then about fundamental. This is what happened to Nelson Mandela.
And we will have to stop. Had to be buried. And that he somehow of power Knew was going to happen in South.
And the government and doing, especially in the last 8 years, his vision. South Africa of him and what
And where the challenge is.
طبعا تشتغلون مع الأسر المنتجة.